It used to be that fashion retailers rolled out distinctive spring, summer, fall, and winter fashion lines. But if you walk into one of the larger chain clothing retailers today, blink and you'll miss out on their stock. Product turns over constantly. It's so cheap to buy and easy to churn out. But there's a cost to cheap. Here to tell us why we should reconsider inexpensive, mass-produced clothing, Sarah Portway. She's a PhD candidate in apparel design and an instructor of fashion design and visual thinking at Cornell University in Ithaca, New York, but you're from here originally, and it's great to have you here at TVO.
Thank you.
You are going to have to do a bit of educating of the host here, okay? Because I will confess off the top that fashion is not necessarily my strong suit. So, with that in mind, fast fashion, what is that?
Fast fashion essentially describes a production model, whereas most people sort of associate it with cheap clothing readily available to them in retailers like H&M or Forever 21. What it actually describes on the back end is a production practice where we go from design of the garment to retail of the garment in 6 weeks, rather than the traditional timeline, which would be about 6 months. So you can see how that's a pretty dramatic contraction in time, hence the word fast fashion. And
thus no more spring, summer, fall, or winter lines. Everything's just sort of compressed.
Seasons are pretty much over, yeah.
Now, why did this happen?
Well, that's a multifaceted question, of course. But it happened for quite a few reasons. Fashion theorists say that there's so many mixed messages going on in terms of what's on trend right now that we want to buy more and more, and we need a bunch of different looks for a season rather than one. So that's one explanation. Another explanation would be making money. If you can sell more product more quickly and sell through your entire unit number, like sell every product of that style, then you're going to make a better profit. So these are a few reasons. And then also consumer demand. We want to go shopping and we want the store to look new every time. So that's exciting.
We appear to have an insatiable demand for new product always.
Absolutely, yeah.
Is this healthy?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, is it healthy for us? I don't know. It's nice to have a new dress all the time, I'll say that.
So the fact is that if you were to go into the typical middle-class person's closet today, what you would see compared to, say, 25 or 50 years ago would be what?
A lot more clothing.
A lot more.
Which, to bring it back to this health issue, is not so great for the planet. And so one of the stories that I sort of like to tell about how we know we have more clothes is just look at your closet. I mean, if you go into a Victorian home, the closet's pretty tiny, and probably the first thing you're gonna do is turn that little kid bedroom into a walk-in closet. Whereas when you look at a brand new shiny condo, you probably already have the walk-in closet and then less living space. And so you can actually see how we've been displaced almost from our own living space by our clothing. And that extends to stuff as well, but yeah, it's...
But everything I thought is supposed to go up in price as the years go on. And I know, for example, when I was a kid, well, maybe not a kid, but let's say 25, 30 years ago, if I wanted to buy a t-shirt, probably 20 bucks, maybe even 25 bucks for a nice t-shirt. You can get a t-shirt today for what, 7, 8 bucks, 9 bucks?
If that.
If that even.
$4.99 tables, that kind of thing, yeah.
Am I getting good quality for $4.99?
Oh, are you expecting good quality for $4.99?
Okay, good question.
Yeah.
What am I getting for $4.99?
Well, you are probably getting a product that someone hasn't been paid, basically, on that deal. And I can tell you it's probably not the brand. And it's probably not the people working in North America. The designers and the retail workers, they get paid retail minimum wage, and there's issues around internships and that kind of thing. But the workers making that t-shirt are the ones that lose out.
The workers in Bangladesh and India and mostly where these things are made, right?
Exactly, yeah. The sort of labor laws are very lax, and labor is much cheaper in those nations. And that also explains why the price has come down on t-shirts. As developing nations have sort of entered the clothing market, they've been able to offer an even more competitive rate on their labor. And they do so by exploiting workers that didn't have a job before.
Okay, if you take that part of, I appreciate it's difficult to do this, but if you take that out of the equation, the notion that the supply line gets more efficient, everybody's got a better business model, therefore we're going to pay less now than we did 25 years ago for something. I mean, in theory, That's kind of how capitalism works, isn't it? And
Absolutely.
That's to be admired at some level, is it not?
Well, we're getting into a different argument now,
Okay,
aren't we,
bigger
Steve?
question, yes. So tell me.
But I would say that there is absolutely an economic imperative for brands to offer that low price to their customers. You know, I see that. I'm price conscious. I'm a grad student. You know, but there's also sort of this other kind of uglier side of it where you know, if you're looking at a $4.99 t-shirt, you only have to think back a few steps in the supply chain. So think about the retail employee that checked you out, you know, through the register, and then think about the manager of that store, and then think about the distribution manager for all the locations in that area. Go back, think about the brand, the designer, and you can actually start to go all the way back to the person that sewed the garment, probably many hands sewed each different piece, and then further back than that, the person who spun the fabric. Further back than that, the person who drove the fiber from the farm. Further back than that, the person who planted the seed. So you can imagine how a $4.99 t-shirt, like not everybody's gonna get a cut of that. And that doesn't include logistics and transportation, warehouse and distribution costs. You know, some manufacturers ship by boat, which is cheaper. Some use air, more expensive. The hydro, keeping the lights on in the store.
Right. So
these all come out of that $4.99.
A ton of different points along the way where clearly, I mean, somebody's got to make some money. So who's winning and who's losing in that whole supply chain that you've just described?
Well, that's a contentious issue too, because I mean, we win, we get an inexpensive product, but we also get a lot of products that fall apart and then displace us from our own homes, as I mentioned in the wardrobe. But then we also, you know, we also see this argument that developing nations are able to develop on that money. So, you know, there's this kind of rhetoric that by manufacturing in Bangladesh, everybody gets risen up. And taken out of poverty. And, you know, we've seen that in countries like China, for example, when they went into apparel production, they started moving into value-added goods, and that was very economically beneficial. But there's some real stumbling blocks in the meantime, and, you know, forced work, you know, living in a dorm next to a factory, which, I don't know, I like a little work-life separation personally.
But somewhere along the way, somebody's making 3 cents a day so that we can wear that $5 t-shirt.
Yeah, if that.
Do you think people who go into the malls of America, let's put it that way, into the department stores, into the boutiques, and who put down $5 for a t-shirt, understand the whole process you just described?
Oh, absolutely not. No,
I didn't.
I didn't until I started doing the research. I mean, I've been working in this field for 7 years now in a research capacity, and I think I had about 10 years of retail experience before that. So all of that starts to kind of, you know, amass some knowledge about where this stuff comes from. But I mean, when you look at how many people actually are even interested in that kind of thing or would think about it.
But tell me this, why do you want a consumer to worry about anything other than how much this costs and whether it's a quality product?
Well, there's a lot of decisions that go into buying clothing. It's not just cost and quality, it's also fit, style, color, you know, does this dress make me feel special? And those are all really important decisions.
No, I get that, but
Yeah.
do you want people who actually go into a store to buy a $5 t-shirt to think about, as part of their decision-making process, the life of the person 4,000 kilometers away who made this?
I certainly would. And I do think it's our responsibility as consumers to think about that. I particularly, I mean, I hang out in Ithaca with a lot of eco-minded people who have never thought about their clothing at all. And so they'll go farther to shop at an organic grocery store, socially justified grocery store, which we are very lucky in Ithaca to have amazing food available. And so I often liken this kind of thing to food. So if you're willing to buy organic food, why don't you think about that in clothes? And I mean, even the people who are doing organic food are not thinking about it in their clothes. And I would love to see that bridge gapped. I just think that it's one of those really self-evident consumption questions that somehow got skipped. You know, we know oil is the #1 worst polluter in the world, and actually now we know that fashion's #2, and then agriculture is #3.
Fashion's the second worst polluter in the world?
Absolutely.
Okay, explain it.
Well, so when you look at water pollution and you look at logistics and transportation, carbon emissions, I mean, water pollution alone is pretty nasty stuff. I've heard a story about this one village just, a couple of kilometers downstream from a textile factory in Cambodia, where out of the 20 births last year, 17 of them had some sort of deformity, and 10 of them were very, very obvious and debilitating. Like they're going to need help their whole life.
Because of the chemicals that are going into that water supply.
I mean, that's what I would suppose. They're washing, cleaning, and drinking this water. So it's pretty nasty.
What percentage of people that go into a store to buy a $5 t-shirt do you think about all of that?
Oh, percentage? 1%? 2?
One or two people out of 100 think about the backstory behind that t-shirt purchase.
In my experience working in retail with, I've helped thousands of customers over the years. I have very rarely heard many people ask too many questions about where something was made unless I was working in a local boutique.
And since you want them to think about that more often, why do you think they aren't?
I think it's really hard to think about it. It's such a learning curve, and I imagine people watching this program are even surprised that I mentioned the person that planted the seed. I used to teach a program here in Toronto in public schools, and I would go through the supply chain with my students every day. I would get a new grade 4 through 8 class, and I would teach them the supply chain. And the number of them that actually knew that cotton was a plant originally was like kind of shocking how little there was that understood that. And so when you think those people get older and maybe they know cotton's a plant once they're an adult, but they still don't think about all the people that did it. And then, the nasty labor history around cotton is also something worth mentioning. It's not a fun job to pick cotton. Yeah.
Let's, I want to try a different angle on this. My hunch is there's lots of people who think, okay, fine, I go in and I buy far more clothing today than I ever did in the past, and therefore I turn over my wardrobe more frequently, and therefore the stuff that I no longer wear, I'll take to Goodwill or I'll take to the Salvation Army, and somebody's going to enjoy it. It might be me for a little while, but ultimately somebody else is going to enjoy it for a while as well. Is that accurate?
That's a really big question again. So it's accurate on some levels and it's inaccurate on others. So there are lots of places where we get rid of our old clothes, one of them being to take them to the Salvation Army, for example, or Value Village or something like that. And in those points, they sort it and put it on the floor, because there's stuff that gets, ripped nylons, for example, that get donated that obviously are going to the trash. There's also those bins that you see by the road, and those are a little more interesting for me. I have a friend who did extensive and absolutely amazing research on this in New York State, Autumn Newell. She's an incredible person, and she found that actually a lot of these clothes end up going to private sorting facilities. So most of those boxes are actually owned by somebody, not a charity. And so those will go back to a sorting facility where the products will be sorted by type. And so low-grade t-shirts, for example, will get bundled up and probably sent somewhere like Africa in the name of disaster relief. Scare quotes. And then, if it's a pair of vintage Levi's, that's going to get sent to Japan because there's really high dollar value on that in the secondhand market. Same with, the used Rolling Stones or t-shirts, Ramones, that kind of thing. Very, very high value vintage rock t-shirts. Great business there. And then, you get sort of your mid-range products that might be go to a different sorting facility where consignment pickers might find it, for example. So there's all these different kind of echelons of value that get sorted out, and a lot of people would never know about that. And actually in Toronto, they're very lucky to have Toronto Rag Works. If I'm not mistaken, it's still kicking, where they shred up old rags or old clothing and use it to sop up oil spills and that kind of thing in, auto facilities and that sort of thing.
How much of it ends up in a landfill site?
Oh, so much. It's quite remarkable, actually. So in the last 10 years, the most recent statistics that I looked at is something like 30% of our waste going into landfills is textiles. And
Old clothes we don't want anymore.
Yeah.
30%.
And that's up from about 10% in about 10, 15 years prior. I'm a little foggy on the exact numbers. So, if there's someone out there that's looking up my facts, like, it might be a little shaky, but it's in that range, and it is scary because a lot of those textiles could be recycled or reused. And so in terms of what we're putting out, I've heard numbers as high as 20 pounds of clothing a year that we're throwing away, but it changes every year.
Well, let's try this in our last couple of minutes here, and that is, do you think there's anything we can do that presumably you would like to see happen, which would get people shopping more ethically for clothing, and sort of getting away from this sort of wasteful $5 T-shirts, which I'll wear twice and then throw out and end up in some landfill site, et cetera?
Yeah.
How do we get away from that?
I struggle with that as a consumer myself, but I would say there's some pretty clear-cut things we can do. Thing one, make sure you love it when you buy it, because then you're going to wear it, Can you see yourself wearing it in 5, 10 years? And if you can, then it's a great purchase. And if you can't, maybe at least think twice, or maybe it's an event and you need a dress. Don't buy it, rent it, or borrow it from a friend. There's some great kind of circular and sharing economies that are popping up, especially online, where you can get secondhand merchandise or rent for a very reasonable price, considering what you would spend on something new that you wear once. So those are a couple ways. You can also shop from the retailers that are doing good, and that's at least voting with your dollars.
Thanks, Sarah.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit TVO.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.